Welcome back to Action Hour. I'm back with WEAN founders Marianne and Steve Erickson. Full disclosure, we're recording this episode the morning after the presidential election, which brings into focus for me the importance of environmental regulations on a local level. With the likely gutting of environmental protections on the federal level in the near future, our local communities become the stronghold for the future of our planet. On earlier episodes, we covered the Growth Management Act, the comprehensive planning process, and what critical areas are, which sets the stage for us to talk about the legal battle between WEAN and Island County for environmental protections, including critical areas protections. So when we first had a conversation about this the other day, Marianne let me know that this story really begins in 1982. So what was going on in Island County in 1982?
Okay. Be aware that it's just that we got off the bus in 1982. So I'm going to start way back in 1966 when Island County adopted an interim zoning ordinance. Mm-hmm. And Island County has the distinction of having had the longest running interim zoning ordinance of any county in the country. Mm-hmm. And that lasted until 1984. So what had been happening was that every now and again, someone in the planning department would go in a back room and write themselves a new zoning ordinance, and out of the blue, they would present it, and nobody would know anything. There was no preparation. It was just, here it is. They present it to the county commissioners, and all of the old timers, the good old boys, would come screaming out of the woodwork and say, "You can't do this to us." And it would die. And that happened time and again from 1966 until 1982, when they decided to do something a little bit different. And they hired an outside consultant to make this thing happen. Mm-hmm. And that's when we started attending those meetings. Mm-hmm. And much to our shock and surprise, our participation was accepted, and our suggestions were taken seriously. Huh. And it was very collaborative. This was a 2-year process, and in 1984, then the county adopted its first not temporary zoning ordinance, and it had, there were good features to it. A man named Keith Dearborn, a land use planner and attorney, was their hired consultant. And the 84 ordinance, for the very first time, acknowledged the existence and presence of at least some critical areas and the need to protect them. And according to Steve, that's the first zoning ordinance in Washington that acknowledged the existence of critical areas. And they weren't calling them critical areas at the time, but I remember that streams and wetlands in particular were focus. Mm-hmm. And basically, when the dust settled, there was a 50-foot buffer required on streams. Mm-hmm. Steve remembers a 25-foot buffer on estuarine wetlands. Mm-hmm. And there was a buffer on forested wetlands. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a whole lot in the way of enforcement for quite a while, but there it was in the code. It also specified the rural zone, 1 dwelling unit per 2.5 acres. Mm-hmm. And it had a lot of shortcomings. And the non-residential floating zone was a big shortcoming. You could do anything you wanted because it was basically spot zoning.
Can you explain what that means, the non-residential floating zone, and what is spot zoning? I know you've mentioned them before in previous episodes, but
basically, You want to build a gas station mini mart out in the middle of nowhere. You would go to the planning department and ask for the for the non-residential floating zone, and they would
PVC buoy plant.
We'll get into that one some other time. Anyway, and they would get a rezone just automatically in the middle of nowhere for no particular reason. And
so I'm kind of envisioning that as kind of like, the flying saucer hovers over any part of the landscape and shoots its beam down, and now it has different zoning.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And when you see the things that you're puzzling, what the hell is this doing here? How did this get here? That was, most of those were a result of the non-residential floating zone. And fast forward to 1998, it was one of the things that we pushed hard to get out of there because it was blatantly illegal.
Right. Because like what it did was basically like you had, zoning ordinances, but all you had to do was go to the county and request special permission and you'd get it, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It wasn't even special permission. It was routine permission.
And basically, under the ordinance, it was rezone on demand. You didn't being in the forest zone. You just went up to the county and you got it changed to whatever.
Yeah.
Right. But what is important about the 1984 ordinance is that there was one for the first time that wasn't temporary, and that it did acknowledge wetlands and streams as critical habitat and ecosystems, like in a rudimentary way.
Yeah. I mean, it was a start.
Yeah.
A good start.
I did read or skim the 1984 ordinance, and something that I noticed in the wetlands area, which I thought was interesting, and I was wondering if there was a legal definition for this or not, but there's a difference between valuable wetlands and unique/outstanding wetlands. And I was wondering what the difference is between those two.
I think there were definitions back then, but it's been long enough that I can't remember the difference. Can you, Steve?
No.
Okay. Yeah. But it's they're not legally defined definitions.
There's probably something in that code somewhere.
Yeah.
Definition, or they just used them as categories.
Okay. I mean,
these wetlands unique. We're going to call these wetlands valuable. Yeah, I remember unique was widely being used by in Island County, which is very weird because none of the stuff is unique.
Well, that's what made me think it was interesting. Like what makes a wetland valuable versus outstanding? That was the like, and why isn't something that's valuable also outstanding? I don't know.
This group screams the loudest at the hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was an awful lot of, that ain't a wetland. That's a swamp.
Mm-hmm.
That was a classic that we heard all the time. So
that it wasn't a wetland, it was a swamp, and that they were different somehow, even though swamps are wetlands, right? Like anything categorically that is wet, basically.
The state was just getting to that stage of considering that these are important places and that they need some kind of special designation and protection. And what can I say? It wasn't until 1990, the Growth Management Act, that we had anything that said these are special and need protection.
Yeah, 1982 and 83, there was, that was kind of the last of the large wetland drainage hurrahs in Island County. As far as I know, one of them being right across from where we live now. Another being on Coldest Bay Road with a peat mining that a several 100-acre area. Itches.
On Coldest Bay?
Yeah,
which one?
Katrin. That whole area.
Oh, now you mention. Anyway,
Okay. I think I'm curious if the 1984 ordinance, even with the non-residential floating zone and spot zoning, whether it did protect wetlands. I mean, you're saying that the last straight up draining of a wetland happened in 82 and 83.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in theory it did, but I can't think of any enforcement up until 89.
Yeah. So Steve's first case was in 1989. It went to the hearings examiner. One of the Facamas, I think it was Bob Facama, wanted to build 22 houses, I think it was, outside of Oak Harbor. Then it was outside, next to the golf course. And he wanted the houses to have a view of the golf course. So he was going to clear and grade 1 acre of forested wetland to provide that view. And we challenged that in front of the hearings examiner. Mm-hmm. And won, hands down.
Yeah, the mitigation was going to be planter boxes.
You have mentioned this before. I remember you mentioning this particular case.
The way the ordinance was written, kind of basically, you could, dig a hole, call it a duck pond, and it all was good.
Mm-hmm.
So that particular case, it hinged on a mistake of the wetland consultant, and Steve took great advantage of that mistake to say that either the wetland consultant didn't know what he was doing, or this was such an incredibly special place that it needed to undergo at least an environmental impact statement, if not a state level protection.
Yeah. And so that was pre-GMA, but with the ordinance in place in the county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we stopped that one until it got annexed into Oak Harbor.
And now in the last couple of years, I've talked to somebody who lives in that neighborhood, and he walks in that forested wetland on a regular basis. So lo these many years later, those trees are still standing. We still have that 1 acre of forested wetland. So that is kind of where we started. Okay, that was 1989. 1990, the Growth Management Act passed, but there was no enforcement mechanism.
Right. So the state legislature had passed the Growth Management Act, but there was no way for the state to enforce any of the regulations within that act on a county level.
There was no way for any enforcement.
None.
Next year, the legislature came back to tie up loose ends and added provisions that created growth management hearings boards with the members appointed by the governor, who sat on his butt. Was that Booth Gardner? Did not appoint any members to the hearings boards before the latter part of 1995.
Okay, so there was this period between 1990 and 1995 where the law had passed, but nobody was really acting on it because they didn't have to.
Yeah, and the legislature kept pushing back compliance deadlines, like when counties had to adopt their, first GMA comprehensive plan and regulations.
I've got to say that the first deadlines were unrealistic. They in 1990 they said by 91 you have to have accomplished this, and all the counties went, "You what?"
Yeah, that doesn't seem really reasonable.
And so it kept getting pushed out and pushed out and pushed out.
It became a joke.
Yeah.
And, and what it all meant was, of course, very much up in the air because there had been no litigation clarifying it. And GMA was your usual result of sausage making in the legislature, to put it mildly. And in terms of critical areas, with Island County just adopted a resolution saying our existing ordinance is good enough, and there was no way to appeal it. So there you go.
Right. So in this period of time where the 1984 county ordinance is on the books, the GMA has passed, and there's no appeal mechanism or enforcement mechanism at all. Just business as usual?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So when does it change?
Well, interestingly enough, I think it was 1992, and Larry Corsick was the planning director. There was this, I don't know what to call it, a spate of critical area violations. One person over at Deer Lake blocked the culvert under Deer Lake Road to make it look like there was not a creek running down to the lake. And then he clear cut that area. Somebody else thought that he had done a good job of burying his wetland under 13 feet of fill. Let me think. There were half a dozen of these violations. And for reasons we still don't quite understand, Larry went after him. And they got together and they hired a lawyer, and we ended up in court over in Snohomish County.
They were alleging it was unconstitutional. The judge kind of looked at what they'd done and said, well, we're going to have a trial on this. And they kind of went away.
Yeah.
Wait, so who was alleging that what was unconstitutional?
The 6 violators.
Okay.
Got together and said, how dare you? You can't challenge what we have done. And that back then got heard in Snohomish County Superior Court. And the judge, I mean, they wanted a summary judgment out of the judge saying this is unconstitutional and send Island County away. And the judge looked carefully at it and said, well, we're going to have to look at the circumstances of each one of these to see what the violation is and what the reality on the ground is. And basically, the violators didn't come back, and they ended up settling with Larry and Island County. I mean, they were small fines, but they were acknowledgments of violation.
Okay, so they were fined for the violation, but there was no mitigation that happened as a result.
Really? Well, the culvert got unblocked.
Okay, the culvert got unblocked.
The road is still there, which it probably wouldn't be if it had been.
Okay.
Yeah, and at about the same time, the county weakened the wetland ordinance in a fairly critical way, and we appealed that and we lost. The ordinance previously had said you deduct the area in wetlands for purposes of calculating development density. And they pulled that out, and that just makes an enormous difference.
So if you have a 10-acre parcel and half of it is wetland, then it used to be the case that you could then only count 5 acres toward how much development you could do.
Right. So, and with the 1984 ordinance, it was like 1 unit per 2.5 acres. And then rural residential was 3 per acre.
3.5.
3.5. And so if you had 10 acres, you could do the math based on 10 acres, regardless of whether or not there were wetlands.
Right.
Okay.
And that one, I mean, that is still the case.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. State DOE just, being, after all, ultimately a political agency. I mean, every public agency is ultimately political, and they would not defend deducting development density. So,
and the best we got.
It fell to us, and I confess now I would do a way better job, but we lost. Basically on the basis that the hearing examiner threw up his hand and said, well, how would you even study this? And I can now think of lots of ways, but...
You could think of lots of ways now, but at the time, did those ways exist?
Sort of, but I did not understand them enough, and we did not have support, and I was pretty inexperienced.
Right,
so.
Which we forgive you for, Steve. I don't know everything.
And we didn't have the oomph to take it higher into court, so.
Right. But it is interesting to think about that caveat or that reality now when we're thinking about development and the comprehensive planning process in 2024/2025 for the next 20 years, because there is this kind of larger question about the capacity of islands in general for development.
Yeah.
So one of the little, I don't know what to call it, angles around this is that theoretically you are not allowed to impact the critical area in your development, except if you need to impact the critical area in order to gain access to the non-critical area. So there was one development off of Ewing Road proposed that was going to require upward of 1,000 feet of, quote, floating road through the wetland to access the 28 houses they wanted to build up on the hill. And
again, we lost that, but economics took over and killed it ultimately.
Yeah.
So okay. So
Iowa County earnestly started planning on not planning. And you had situations like members of the Planning Commission, for example, being one of the founders of the Property Rights Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And, we would go to these interminable Planning Commission meetings where, the atmosphere was seriously hostile, to anybody sticking their head up. And it would be once or twice a week. And these were like 4 and 5 and 6 hour meetings and hearings. And basically nothing would happen, and we'd come home and we'd go, and we'd have to recuperate for a day or two between.
Mm-hmm.
So bad. And this just went on for year after year after year. And then finally, in the latter part of 1995, the governor finally appointed members of the Growth Management Hearings Board. The legislature finally set the deadline for adoption of a comprehensive plan and development regulations as December 31st, 1995.
Mm-hmm.
And about that time, I quit going to the Planning Commission meetings and just started preparing for that. And so December 31st, I filed our first GMA appeal. And those appeals, that whole spate of initial appeals, were basically just challenging the county's failure to act.
Well, low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, call it low-hanging fruit. And basically argued what they've done at this point is so bad that it seriously interferes with the fulfillment of GMA's goals, these regulations they have on the books. And the two powers the hearings board had was they could find a county out of compliance, and they could find that a county, that a regulation was so bad that it seriously interfered with the fulfillment of GMA's goals, in which case they could declare it invalid. They could also, the other power they had was they could give a county a deadline and say, you fix this by such and such a date, or we're going to ask the governor to withhold these various tax receipts. That scared the bejesus out of the county. So
okay.
We started.
Some questions.
Okay.
First of all, what were some of the regulations that were particularly egregious, if you remember?
The very first case, as I recall, was the first or the second one. We challenged the 3.5 houses per acre zoning.
That was
the entire shoreline was zoned for 3.5 houses per acre. I ran the math and I figured out Island County was zoned for over 250,000 people.
And what was the population at the time, roughly?
About 60,000, 50,000.
Somewhere around 60,000 countywide.
Yeah. So, and the county got in front of the hearings board. The first case, the county argued that because of the placement of a comma, they didn't really have to do anything ever. And the problem they ran up against was one of the members of the hearings board was a former English professor. So that did not carry the day. On the 3.5 houses per acre, units per acre, they basically argued, well, this is the way we've always done it, and we can't expect people to change now, can we? And the hearings board ruled that, at some point, GMA says you've got to change things. So at some point, you just have to stop. So they invalidated that, leaving all kinds of questions like what zoning was in effect for those lands.
It all reverted to, so there were those that had already been subdivided, and the hearings board determined that they couldn't force a reaggregation of those, but that anything that had not been subdivided reverted to 1 unit per 5 acres.
So that's where the 1 unit per 5 acre rule came?
Sort of. That was an early version of it. And ultimately, the hearings boards, because there were 3 different boards then, kind of adopted the position that 5 acres and above is rural, less than 5 acres is suburban, sprawl and urban. So, but if you look at a zoning map of Island County and you're wondering why sprinkled throughout here and there are these weird little clusters of small lots, that's why. Those were subdivided beforehand. And the county never did require reaggregation, which some counties did in some cases. But Island County never did that.
So those clusters in Island County, they became known as RAIDs, rural areas of more intense rural development. Statewide, they're called LMERDs, limited areas of more intensive
rural development. Yeah, the question I have about that, about these like clusters, and just anecdotally, were these clusters of communities developed at what point, right? Was there like a development boom that happened when zoning allowed?
Okay, let me do this one. So the in the Growth Management Act, a LMERD or a RAID is defined as the logical outer boundary of development as it existed in 1990.
Right. So these developments happened prior to 1990.
Not necessarily.
No.
The subdivision may have happened prior to 1990.
Okay.
And what we're seeing now, that was yet another one of our cases, is that we took this big, long list of raids because what Island County did was they declared everything a raid. And we then had to go through each one of these, and we fell short. We went through a whole bunch, but not enough, and pointed out that this is what constitutes the logical outer boundary of development if what you're looking at is 20 acres of forest.
Right. That was theoretically subdivided prior to 1990, but not developed.
Exactly. And so there were arguments about, well, we put in the utilities and therefore that's the logical outer boundary of development here. And the poor hearings board members, basically the raids that we did the research on and showed them to be, not legitimate, got thrown out. The ones that we didn't have the bandwidth to do the research on, they left alone.
Every place where we produced an aerial photo that we overlaid boundaries and parcels on, we won. Every place where we didn't, we lost. And
I have a question.
Getting aerial photos like that was not trivial at all.
Right, because you didn't have Google Maps.
Google Maps, yeah, GIS, geographic information systems, were in their very early form at that point. Around then, I remember we managed to get a 200 megabyte hard drive donated to us, and the list price for it was $5,000.
Yeah, it was enormous. WEAN had one of the very first prototype GIS systems. 1993, when we won the case against Oak Harbor, we ended up with $35,000. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to do with it? Steve said, let's build a GIS system. At the time, the price tag was in the millions.
Wow.
So we went to my son, the techie nerd, and
Guy walked in our door and
serendipity.
Said, this guy walked in our door and he had just graduated from
I don't even know where, but
UMass or someplace with a degree in GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and said, hey, I talked to Audubon, but they didn't, get back to me, or they didn't want anything to do with this. What can I do?
So he and my son got together and designed a GIS. And then my son, being the techie nerd, you don't go in the front door and ask the PR people. You go in the back door and ask the guys in the shop, hey, do you have an extra blah, blah, blah sitting on the shelf? And so we ended up with literally $1 million worth of tools and system.
And it was still inadequate.
Yeah, because, the larger support system
didn't exist.
And the two of them would go up to a friend's house, and it would take 48 hours to download a map.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was rickety.
I understand how this was.
But because it was so, energy intensive, work intensive, we simply could not do all of those raids.
And of course, there was no system to upgrade it. For example, if somebody does a subdivision or development, how do you get that information? How do you get it from the county? How do you get it into the GIS? None of that existed then. All this, of course, kind of stuff really should have been being done by the county. And the county made some feeble efforts that mostly amounted to rewarding friends of the commissioners. There was one person on the island who had some kind of techie business, that developed a system where they had it in every parcel. They put a centroid, a point in the center, and that was what you could find and analyze. So you couldn't tell how big a polygon was, or it was pretty primitive. Mm-hmm. By that point, ArcGIS, as ESRI, Environmental Research Systems Information Services, which is, the big GIS outfit now.
Yeah.
Really big. And they got their start doing environmental stuff exclusively, and they've expanded. But that's kind of the industry standard, though now lots of other GIS systems will plug into that and use that. It's like the county commissioners just had no interest in financing anything like that. That would actually, and which would have saved enormous amounts of work, for the people actually in the county doing the work. But generally, the commissioners of the time, their main attitude towards the planners and the people actually doing the work at the county was, be efficient, don't cost us as little as you can, and don't make any of our constituents unhappy. And that attitude, of course, permeated the department totally. In fact, that was about the time when there was a change that happened about that time, when all of a sudden agencies everywhere rebranded everybody as a customer. It was no longer, a citizen looking for information or wanting to do a development or getting a permit to move their driveway entrance onto the road or anything like that. Everybody became a customer. And of course, that means you don't want to offend the customer, even if the customer has just filled a wetland.
Right, because the customer is always right.
Or run a bulldozer over the neighbor's land and, trashed it out or something. So, so that was a kind of a social change at the same time that occurred. another change that kind of occurred at the same time was a huge push on regulatory reform. This continues to the present day. We don't want any duplicative regulations. For example, just in case, something was missed on the first screen of a regulation, we don't want another regulation that might pick up that problem, because that would be duplicative. So gradually over time, State Environmental Policy Act has increasingly become more and more limited, is one example of that. There are deadlines when counties must, actually make decisions by and stuff. So it's just been this incredible dance back and forth between the development community and the agencies that regulate them over time here. Because, of course, the development community has enormous sway in government. Mm-hmm. Iowa County basically ran its budget off of development for years and years and years. And I'm not sure at this point that development fees, the actual permit fees people pay at this point, still actually pays for the work involved in processing them, costs involved in issuing and reviewing them.
That's a pretty good question. But I would say that, like, get back to history and basically how the Growth Management Hearings Board and these suits that you started bringing against them, I do want to get back to critical areas and when they kind of came up in the...
Basically, what happened over time here is we just kept filing these suits, hearings board, and they just kept striking down more and more of the existing zoning ordinance. Mm-hmm. It was later found they didn't have the power to do that, but it worked at the time until it happened. And, what developers could do in Iowa County, what the local developers could do, just got more and more constrained. So, every time the hearings board would say, you can't just rezone forest land on demand. Mm-hmm. Okay. They'd go screaming, developers would go screaming to the commissioners and put more and more pressure on them to actually finally have to at least appear to comply with GMA instead of taking the attitude, we'll never do this. We'll just keep it, running around the planning commission forever. So they hired Keith Dearborn again.
Okay. And Keith Dearborn was the consultant that worked in the 1984 ordinance, where you guys had a pretty good collaborative relationship with him at the time.
Yeah. And he was an attorney who, in the meantime, had also become executive director of the Building Industry Association of Washington, which is a very right-wing organization.
And they're developers.
Yeah. It basically it can exist and have the political pull it does only because it runs a bunch of programs that allow builders to get discounts on their insurance, safety ratings and those kind of things.
So we know a number of builders here on the island who disagree completely with, they're called BIA, the Builders Building Industry Association. Anyway, but they are members because as members, they can buy into that insurance program. And so BIA then has a lot of money and a lot of influence and a whole lot of people who would rather not have anything to do with them, but they're stuck.
Yeah.
Okay. And so Keith Dearborn was like working with this organization.
He was the executive director.
And what year?
A while in private practice. And then he, took on Island County. Commissioners hired him as a consultant. And, he organized a great big process. And the basic intent was, to do the minimum they could do that Dearborn thought they could get by the hearings board.
And this was to comply with the Growth Management Act. They hired him as a consultant to Was it to write a comprehensive plan
and zoning ordinance.
and
Right.
zoning ordinance? And what year was this?
Started in late 96, early 97.
Yeah, because when they
And-
hired him.
Then came to a head September 28th, 1998, when they passed the comp plan and zoning ordinance. And by September 29th, we had filed our appeal.
Okay.
Yeah, there were two appeals filed, basically. We did the one regarding critical areas, and the organization Citizens for Sensible Development challenges, other parts of it.
And WEAN was a part of this coalition, Citizens for Sensible Development.
Mhm.
And we were basically the lead on all of the appeals.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that then went into, marathon hearing. I think there were 4 days of hearings or something.
Yeah, and that case, the 98-20023C, there were so many issues
Mhm.
that we kind of overwhelmed the hearings board.
Yeah, but that was happening not just in Island County. That was happening around the state for a lot of places.
Yeah.
Right. For I guess for larger context, how many other organizations appealed on behalf of other counties? Do you know?
0023. So ours was appeal number 23 in 1998.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. So they were getting a lot of feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it came from both sides. It was the environmental community saying this is not good enough. And then there was the developer community saying, what are you doing to us?
Yeah.
Right. And so,
PMA was kind of vague.
mhm.
So the hearings board is kind of having to invent this out of whole cloth in a lot of ways.
You know,
And then the courts from there on making their judgments.
So what were the main points of this initial 1998 appeal, and how long did this case last?
Were the main points.
Yeah,
Okay. So the main points was many of the raids were not existing areas of,
mhm.
of
So the
work.
logical outer boundary aspect. Okay.
That was one. On another one, we argued that because they were supposed to have a variety of rural densities, that they needed more than just 5 acre zoning.
Hmm.
Okay. Trying to think now. It's been a long time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm GMHB cases.
Probably won't find it there because it was early on and computer stuff was flaky. And indeed,
98-20023C. So there.
see what the earliest thing you got there. I mean, you can look up. I think the hearings board may have finally updated their website to where they've got everything in there. So they've got, our petition for review.
Oh, God.
Let's see.
That was Andy Castell and his single point graph. Remember that one?
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So on critical areas anyway, some
Mhm.
of the key issues were adequacy of wetland and stream buffers.
Mhm.
And, because they kept estuarine wet. Well, first, because we had challenged the adoption in 92 when the county adopted a resolution saying, our existing ordinance is good enough.
Right.
The county argued that we missed our chance and they didn't really have to do anything. And anything they did do was purely out of the goodness of their hearts anyway. So we challenged adequacy of wetland buffers and stream buffers. We argued that various other kinds of critical areas were not properly protected. Boy, this is kind of off memory, so it's hard.
Right. Well, just looking at the 1984 ordinance, which just they used the 1984 ordinance as a reason to not have to do an update. And
Right.
at the time in 1984, there were more critical areas protections in that ordinance than maybe anywhere else in the state. But when the Growth Management Act came around in 1990 and had specific requirements, it required critical areas protections, right? Like in 1990.
And the science had certainly improved.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1995, a provision got added to GMA that said the regulations to protect critical areas must include best available science.
Okay.
So there are kind of two questions there, two legal questions. One is what does include mean? Is that a substantive requirement or only a procedural requirement? And the other was, what is best available science? Okay, which, and the actual statute did not clarify that at all. The HEAL case, I can't remember what HEAL stands for.
Oh,
Other organizations appeal settled the question of whether it was a substantive requirement. So this means you actually have to protect using the science, not just you have to say, we looked at the science and we decided to ignore it. There were several real early GMA appeals regarding critical areas. One was Clark County, another was the HEAL case. The HEAL case, the Court of Appeals ruled that it was a substantive requirement.
Okay. So the HEAL rule made it clear that it was a substantive requirement to use best available science?
Yes. As to what protect meant, that really kind of got settled in the Swinimus case, where it was brought by the tribes. State Supreme Court ultimately ruled that protect, when you got down to it, they didn't use the term no net loss, but that standard had already been adopted by the boards. And the State Supreme Court ruled that it meant basically to hold safe from harm, do no harm. Now that could prevent future harm, but you couldn't require restoration or enhancement under GMA. Now, this is kind of weird from if you're an actual ecologist, because you can see that if a system is very degraded, it's not just static. Like now it's degraded at this level, and so it's just going to stay there. It's going to keep degrading. And that is what has been occurring, for a long time in many systems, especially regarding salmonids. And so the Swinimus basically lost on that issue because they argued that because it was not a static thing, okay, that meant that you actually had to require restoration to protect. And the court rejected that.
So, but no net loss is in legislature now, right?
Now it is in
legislation.
Now it is the rules for implementing. And then the third case, that early case, relatively, though it wasn't decided, I think, to 2005.
Which one?
Our ruling on critical areas, our first one.
Oh, I'm looking at this 2005 memo.
Yeah, okay. From the Court of Appeals, ruled in our favor, holding that you had to protect all the functions and values. The county had retained 25-foot stream buffers based on the theory that that was adequate to protect water quality, but not a whole bunch of other functions like wildlife habitat, lots of climate amelioration, lots of other things. And the county had argued that since it protected that function of water quality generally, that was adequate, and they didn't have to do anything more. the Court of Appeals ruled that they had to protect all functions and values. Therefore, the county could just say, we're going to protect the water quality value and put a buffer on sufficient to protect water quality in a stream and ignore wildlife.
Right. So it had to be the board ruled that it had to be ecological function.
Yes.
That was the court, not the board.
Ruled. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, the court. Okay, who ruled that?
So state Court of Appeals.
The State Court of Appeals. Okay, so the State Court of Appeals said that critical areas must, like the ecological protection or function, ecological function.
All functions and values.
All functions and values. So that goes beyond ecological function then even.
Yes. And this thing that I pulled up here is dated September 5, 2005, and it's from a memo from Steve. Compliance in case number 982023C and ag area review.
Yeah, we had argued that the agricultural zones were exempted completely from any critical area protections.
Mm-hmm.
We argued that to not comply with GMA. This became a huge deal. The county organized hearings that were basically kind of like Stalinist show trials. For instance, I went to one over on Camino where they had, high school auditorium full of people, including many from Snohomish County who had nothing to do with it in Island County. County sent out, and incited people against us. I had to kind of be escorted home back to the freeway by friends over on Camino there.
Allison Warner.
Yeah.
Oh, shout out to Allison Warner. But also, was this the period of time where you guys had to have bodyguards?
Yeah.
No? Yes.
Yeah. And so it was pretty dicey. The county sent out a mailing to every property owner in Island County, 20,000 or so, something.
Yeah.
That, said, we don't want to do this. We think it's terrible. But a small group of extremist environmentalists with the Environmental Action Network, led by Steve Erickson, is forcing us to do this.
And the irony is that what they were doing was contrary to what we had proposed. It was punitive and unnecessary. And
they were telling people that, if you've got a driveway with a culvert now, you'll have to tear out your driveway and won't be able to have a driveway. They're making all kinds of outlandish claims. We had proposed that we had proposed allowing people to, if they really are doing agriculture and, it involves critical areas, if they opt into the agricultural zone for permanent, no opt out ever, then, we would accept that exemption. The county would not go for that. Now, looking back, they probably wish they had.
So this was 2005-ish?
Yeah. And again, what started in September of 98, the hearings board could not handle all of the 20 or 30 or 40 issues that we raised. So they would take on a small piece of it and remand the rest. And so bit by bit, it got sliced and diced and remanded a million times over. And some of them got new case numbers because the county would take actions theoretically in response to the hearings board's remand.
Yeah.
And then, it just went round and round and over, and we'd slice off one here and dice off another one there, and then the next one would come
and
forward.
Over time, it got ratcheted up. So, for instance, the 25-foot wetland buffers for estuarine wetlands went away, finally. They
went away as in they were improved, right?
Yes. Yeah. Estuarine buffers, got larger than 25 feet that they'd sliced them down to. And they're about to, that's certainly going to be an issue in the current update because the Department of Fish and Wildlife has now essentially proposed that you should either designate repairing areas as critical areas in their own right, or you should protect streams based on the soil and slope around them, which is, a whole other thing. But that's going to be a big war here next.
We'll be back in the next episode to continue our conversation about critical areas and WEAN's battle with the county for environmental protections after the first adoption of the county's comprehensive plan. See you there.
Another man up in the pulpit in the state house. Head of the table with a black pen, scratching egos, talking too loud. Externalize every outcome, every home gun, every profit. And kneeling down to the flashing numbers, the NASDAQ, the cold constructs. Running backwards to just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving. Unlearning every lesson that our mothers tried to teach us.
This podcast is a production of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network and is made possible by our generous donors. Produced, edited, and mixed by me, Amanda Bullis. Special thanks to Marianne and Steve for their years of service through action and for lending their voices to this podcast. To WEAN's Executive Director, Marnie Jackson, and our board for their leadership. Special thanks to Whidbey musician and WEAN board member Nathaniel Talbot for letting us use his track, Intuition, from the album Animal, available on Bandcamp.
Every day on your paycheck, a volume of confidence against the idea of your body being put into your own hands. So please don't hold it, please don't hold it, please don't hold it back. Unleash the power, the straight logic of compassion. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard facts. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Stepping out of the shadow of a false man's allegory, slowly erasing that old violence from the story. Recoupling emotion, slow emotion to intelligence, granting the planters, healers, teachers, feelers a new relevance. What I need now ain't that old religion